Boom. Okay, so good afternoon. It is lunch here in Atlanta, Georgia. I am Waukesha Howe, a community champion. Here doing a conversation with the candidates. And today, well, let me start here first. We are not bought and paid by anybody. This is just community members having a conversation with the 2023 candidates who are running for Atlanta School Board. And today we have Alfred Shivy Brooks, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Alfred Shivy Brooks is my name.
Okay, so Mr. Brooks, we have a icebreaker for you. What did you have to give up to achieve your current success, your current level of success?
Time. That's always been the number one thing. Being ambitious as a entrepreneur and as a community organizer, while at the same time being a teacher, you give up time that you might have doing things you would want to do, to do things you have to do for the community.
Absolutely. So I appreciate that. Time is so important. And so with this next question, I want you to tell us, because I know you from 2021 when we ran for seats way back then. It feel like it's so long ago. But tell us who you are, like where you from, what area you're in, what seat you're running for. Give us a little insight on who you are.
Thank you. Well, my name is Alfred Shivy Brooks. I was originally born in East Orange in Montclair, New Jersey. My father graduated from Morehouse College in 1989 when he brought my family down here to live. So I attended school in DeKalb County, which is where I began my education. I went to Panola Way Elementary School. And then, unfortunately, when my parents divorced, we relocated back to New Jersey, where I completed high school and did 2 years at Rutgers University. When I chose to move back to Atlanta as an adult in 2004. At the time, I was a Freestyle Friday Hall of Famer on BET's 106 in Park. And some folks, if you're old enough, you might remember that. And I moved back here to Atlanta, got involved with community organizing, attended Georgia State University's Andrew Young School of Public Policy, where I graduated with a degree in public policy with a concentration on public administration. And I worked as a legislative aide for a little while at the Georgia State Legislature with the Working Families Caucus, and then managed a $5 million contract for the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities for about 5-6 years through the Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network and Mental Health America Georgia. So unfortunately, my wife and I experienced a loss of a daughter due to premature birth at 24 and a half weeks. And I decided to make a career change. It was something I've been fighting for a long time, which is to become a teacher. My father is a teacher. I have 12 aunts in my family. Of my 12 aunts, 7 of them are teachers. It is, sorry for the bell. It is a family business. My father is still a teacher. He teaches at Arabia Mountain High School in DeKalb County now. That is who I am. So over the past, I would say 4 or 5 years, I have become one of the preeminent or more visible thought leaders in education, specifically urban education. I consult with schools and school districts throughout the country to improve school climate and culture. And I do a lot of work around increasing communication and communication strategies for schools, so that our schools could be more competitive in retaining teachers and getting teachers, but also getting families interested in wanting to bring their children there instead of other options. So that's the work that I do. Day in and day out, I am a high school teacher. I teach here at Charles Drew High School in Riverdale, which is in Clayton County. And I am a special education teacher, but also I teach economics, personal finance, and government. All of my classes are interrelated classes. So I have students who have IEPs and 504s, all the way up to babies who are gifted, if you will. I'll put air quotes on it. So that is the environment that I teach and work in. I know that special education is something that is near and dear to you. And the same thing is true for me, because it disproportionately affects our community in ways that it does not affect others. So
Absolutely. That's true. That's a great segue into one of the burning questions I had when I thought about you in running, especially for at large seat. You're a full-time teacher. Teacher is in your blood, family, dad, aunts. And I love my teachers. I'm a classroom mom, PTA mom, go team mom. Um, how do you plan on being a full-time teacher and being a well, I won't even say full-time, but it's a full-time board member here in Atlanta?
right. And I think the framing of your question kind of speaks to the point. Our school board is not a full-time job. It is a
Mm-hmm.
part-time job, right? But also I'm going to answer your question, but I want to caveat with this. Do we ask architects that question? Do we ask attorneys that question? Do we ask other people that form of a question, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to start with that. But then to answer your question, uh, I do a lot of things as a teacher as it is now. Most teachers, we're not just teachers. We all
Mm-hmm.
have other endeavors and things that we're involved in. And that's one of the benefits of being a teacher, that it does allow for some flexibility to, really invest in your personal endeavors. With my
Mm-hmm.
school, they are extremely accommodating with my aspirations and the work that I do, not only within our community in Atlanta, but throughout the country. So there are allowances and flexibilities that I have that will allow me to be able to serve and show up for our community. Once elected, my number one priority is going to be our schools and our school board. I'm privileged enough that I teach at this point because I choose to. I teach because it's my mission work. And the way my school schedule works, it will allow for me to be able to attend meetings and do certain things that need to be done for the sake of APS.
Okay. Okay. I know that was a question that may be on a lot of people's mind because being a full-time teacher, being in the classroom, sometimes they can't get a break, and that's why I became a classroom mom, just to be able to come in and make those copies and be supportive so that they don't feel left in the classroom alone.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I follow up with you on that though?
sure.
Currently, the way that our school board was never intended for a teacher to serve on our school board, right?
Okay.
It took
Mm-hmm.
3 years of lobbying on my behalf at our state legislature to actually get the legislation changed this year to allow for a teacher to be active in the classroom and
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. In fact, APS has been sued by educators who wanted to serve on the board in the past.
Okay.
Um, and so when we look at our meeting schedules, and it's very few daytime meetings that would be had, but they're not they're not with consideration for a teacher serving at the same time. So there has to be, I
Right.
think, accommodations and some changes made for
Okay.
how to do business if we are serious about having the voice of teachers at the table.
Um, Now to that point, I was doing some research and I seen that some legislation had got changed. Um, I mean, I'm absolutely fine with teachers serving if that's what they choose to do. But I was just wondering, how do they do both full time? I noticed that some legislation was changing. It had some help of our past um, elected officials that supported that legislation to move that whole idea along of having a teacher, but that would be more accommodating for you, but your role would be to make sure things are more accommodating for the teachers and students, correct?
Yeah, I think both can be true, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that number one, we have to be very clear about this. Allowing a teacher to be on the school board is not something that was just done for Alfred Shivy Brooks. What I hope in me running is that many other teachers who happen to live in the city as well are also inspired and encouraged and feel empowered to run for school board in the future. This is not a me thing. This is not about, you know, I'm the one teacher. No, this is how business should be done. If you go over to a hospital and you look at a nursing board, you're not going to see a nursing board without nurses. If you look at a medical board, you're not going to see a medical board without doctors. You're not going to see a dental board without dentists. So why have we normalized school boards that don't have educators or people who have ever worked in a school? And then we would say to ourselves, why do we get policies that tend to not work? Because the people making the policies are people who have never done that work before. So there is a serious value add in someone who has the practical experience at the table. And not only just the practical experience, but in my case, I have the practical experience, but also I have the policy chops. I'm
Okay.
educated in public policy. I've
Mhm.
done legislative work. So I give us a nice combination of the two. And what's more is that I'm a community organizer and someone that people know. I serve as
Right.
the Georgia NAACP Education Chair and have for the past 2 years. I'm on the executive board of the People's Uprising. You know,
Mhm.
some of the people who I see on the live right now are people who I was marching with in the streets between 2020 and 2021.
Mhm.
So this is, I think, our opportunity to really have someone who is very well rounded, but that we also know has the interest of the community at hand first.
Right. So let me say this for the
I
record,
can't
because
hear
I
you, sister.
can you hear me? You can't hear me?
I'm sorry. I think my Siri on my thing just started going off and it was
Oh,
blocked.
okay.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go
Oh,
ahead.
no, I was gonna say, we have some people who have been teachers. We got some attorneys, that serve on the board. Currently, not an active teacher, but I know they have some of the experience. Staying on a teacher subject, I seen you talk a lot about increasing the salaries of teachers, which
Yeah.
is super important. Like hands down, it has to happen. If you're elected, um, how could that happen? What could we move around?
Yeah.
Do we have to raise property taxes? Like what do we have to do to get to the point of making sure teachers have a livable wage? Because you're a teacher, you live in Atlanta, but you may work in Clayton. So we know our teachers in Atlanta, they can live here. What would you do to give them the increase and you know make sure that they can live here and work here?
Yeah.
Like, how did that look for you?
So what I propose is that our teacher base salary should be 65,000. Like no teacher in
Okay.
the city of Atlanta should make less than $65,000 a year. That's my number. And I
Okay.
believe in the next 5 years, we should be working intentionally to get there. And what that's going to look like is
Mhm.
we're going to have to tackle this budget because our budget is way inflated to central office, where we're spending 60% of our budget at central office and only 40% is going towards the classroom. So if we
Mhm.
start moving our funds towards the school so that we can support better salaries for our teachers, it's going to be the way that
Mhm.
we're done.
Mhm.
It's something we have to do. If we want to
Right.
get outcomes for students, you're going to have to work on having better incomes for teachers. And the same thing,
Mhm.
not just our teachers. We have to better support our bus drivers because making
Yes.
$21 an hour is an insult. We have to better support our cafeteria workers because $21 is an insult. My grandmother was a cafeteria worker in schools my entire life. She came to
My
America.
sister is one right now. She's a cafeteria worker right now. Well, she's a manager right now.
Who is
So
that?
yeah, my sister.
Your
My
sister. Okay.
sister who actually went to Drew Charter School in Riverdale. So she's a cafeteria worker right
We're not
now.
we're not a charter school, by the way. We're just a traditional public
That's
school.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
public school.
right. Drew
Um
Charter is in Atlanta.
that one. So yeah, she went there and now she is a manager.
No,
And I do.
but to that point, we pay the people who directly contact our children a low
Mhm.
income wage.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I want to tap in on something that you said about like whether or not our teachers can afford to live in the city of Atlanta. The truth of the
Okay.
matter is that what is considered low income under HUD is $57,000. Our teacher
Mhm.
starting base pay is $54,000. And in fact, we pay our teachers less than we pay our police officers, and they're required to have a college degree while our officers are not.
Mhm.
When we look at like, are we really compensating our teachers a living and thriving wage? No, the truth is that we're not. If my wife was not a nurse working at Northside Hospital, making almost twice the amount of income that I make, there's no way
Mhm.
we afforded to live in the neighborhood that we did. It
Right.
just not have been possible. So, and to mind you, I was lucky enough to buy my house when in 2011, when, you know, all the prices were
Yeah,
fine.
they were good.
But I could not afford to buy my house for myself today. I could not afford to
Yeah.
live in my neighborhood today if I were to move there with my teacher income. So
Mhm.
yes, we really do have to do better by our teachers in that way.
Yeah, we do. So let me ask you this question and then I'm gonna turn it over to Miss Sherelle. Um you're in the Jackson cluster. That cluster right next to Midtown, and then on top we have
North Atlanta.
North Atlanta. It's like they're busting at the seam. Um, do you support rezoning?
No. Let's be so this is how I started my work in
Mm-hmm.
APS. As I told you, I bought my house in 2011 in Custer McDonough Geis, which is like the
Mm-hmm.
southeast edge of Sam.
Yeah.
We're like the buffer neighborhood, if you will, right? So it's between
Mm-hmm.
you have Woodland Hill, Ormwood, Grant Park, Woodland Hills,
Mm-hmm.
Custer McDonough Geis, and then right behind me is Thomasville, right? And we all know what's going on over at Thomasville. And the things we're having to deal with over there. We have a school closure. We got a community that is looking for some help, and it's looking like they're about to get a heavy dose of gentrification in a moment. So right now in my area, we had to fight to keep Benteen Elementary open in 2011. This is something
Mm-hmm.
that I started doing work for when I first got there, as I was working as a legislative aide at the time. And what I learned was our neighborhood had been historically gerrymandered and kept out of the Jackson cluster, when at the time Wesley International was right at the bottom of the hill. And that truly
Mm-hmm.
was our neighborhood school in the area. It had a lot to do with the suppression of the enrollment at Benton also, right? Um, and so I went and got wet signatures from every neighbor in my area at that time. And with that petition, I worked with SEEK, Southeast Atlanta Community Schools, with my neighbors over there. And we advocated to have the Custer McDonough Geis neighborhood zone into Benteen. And what happened with that is it gave Benteen a sustainable population. And now Benteen, as you know, is being renovated. And
Mm-hmm.
it is soon, because across the street over in Chosewood, we have 400, $500,000 townhouses, which are being built up, which used to be low income apartments,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
used to be. So
Yes.
now the dynamics are about to completely change in our area. And so the conversation from some on the board, namely my opponent, has been about removing Chosewood from our cluster, and that will be removing them away from Benton. But the problem
Mm-hmm.
that I have with that is that it is a predominantly Hispanic population that lives in Chosewood who attend Benton Elementary. And so those
Mm-hmm.
babies who have true like a cultural immersion and a cultural safety there at Benton, because most of their teachers are two language speaking. It is a community. There's a historical reason as to why we have such a large Hispanic population over there, and it has a lot to do with proximity to the prison and some other things. It's a whole nother topic. But
So
now
with that, now listen, I live on that side.
I know you
So
do. You live close
I,
to
I'm
each other. I'm on the
I'm
other side of the
familiar,
train tracks.
right? So I'm familiar with that, the Benteen area. Now they do have a
Right.
large population of Hispanic, but there are some Black families, white
Yes.
families that's in there
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
But so let me ask you this: are you involved with the PTA, PTO,
I'm
or
sorry.
Go Team?
I wanted to finish answering your question though, because you asked me about rezoning. I think that's an extremely important question to talk about, because let's be honest, they sat
No,
down
okay. So for
community
that, let me
engagement.
let me say this so I can turn it over to Miss Sharia. Do you support rezoning? Yes or no?
I do not support rezoning
Okay.
of Benton. I do not support rezoning of Mary Lynn.
Okay.
Okay. I do not support rezoning of Centennial. I do support I do support that Washington always remain open. I believe it is a historical school, and regardless of enrollment, I don't think that school
Mm,
should be threatened for closure. And I know that is a very big concern for many in the area.
right.
We have some things that we have to do. I just had a conversation with Byron Amos yesterday. There were some things that happened in 2012. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
zoning and redistricting that right now we are going to have to tend to, and we're going to have to be serious and intentional about it.
Well,
The question is, do we have the fortitude to actually solve the issue?
so I'm pretty sure, because Washington is my love school. I love Washington. My son just graduated. But Byron's there. He know what happened. And he know that Centennial. He know that they need to be over in the Washington cluster because um those babies have to get up like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to catch a school bus that
Yeah, our
may
transportation,
not
yeah.
get them to, Midtown on time. And so I care about that dearly because they waste, I think I seen a paper where they wasting like maybe 2, 3 extra hours a day on a school bus in traffic, and they're missing that instructional
Yeah.
time. And
No,
so
I
that's why
agree with you.
I
We gotta,
asked.
I agree with you that we have to, first off, again, I said that we have to improve how we compensate our bus drivers, right? There's a big issue that we have with our transportation and the efficiency of our transportation, but also there's another side to it because
Mhm,
I personally very much value diversity, right? And one of my issues about moving Centennial away from Midtown is that you will move them from being a 33% Black school to a 27% Black school. You will now
mhm,
make Washington a 96% Black school and now make them a 98% Black school. So for
mhm.
me, it is the lack of diversity that would result from that. So I do think the other side of it is we do need to have a serious conversation about either a ninth grade academy in the Midtown area. And also we have to acknowledge that there is a cluster that has been missing from the east side when the Crim cluster is not there anymore. So it may be
Mhm.
time for a real conversation. I'm sorry about this announcement.
Oh no, you good. You good. Absolutely fine.
I'm away for him to finish. I
Mhm,
we do need to have some conversations about, is it time for East Atlanta High School or something of that effect on the east side? Because
mhm.
a lot of growth on the east side. But again, like we're not going to be able to keep cutting out of clusters and moving people to then cut people from the north to push them south. Like it's
Right.
just, that's not sustainable.
And that's fair. But I do want to say, being my brother just graduated from the Midtown cluster, um, those kids, it's not just Black kids that would be shift. I know a lot of conversation, and I've been part of the facility master conversation. And it's like you're gonna move these Black kids, and I don't think people realize it's not about the race of these kids. We want to make sure that every child get the best education. They have a safe way to and from school on time, and they're able to be in front of their teacher and get that instructional time. A lot of times people think it's, oh, it's this, and sometimes it's really not, because I've been part
No,
of that
Miss Marquisha, I'm with you on that, but that's also why
conversation.
that's why I would not be for Maryland moving into the Jackson cluster, for example, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that actually is like the opposite of the Centennial situation, where you have a predominantly white school, right? That would be moving, that the conversation is potentially moving them down into the Jackson cluster. But to your point, then they would have to cross the Cab Avenue. They got to go down Moreland. They would have to cross over,
Okay. Yep.
Memorial Drive to go to King Middle School, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about exactly the same concerns and things that you are. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm there with you.
So let me ask you this. This is a good question, and Miss Sheree, I'm finna give it to you. I'm just gonna ask this. What is your plan to end the contract with the partner schools and take back controls of our schools?
Yeah, I think
Good question.
there's a case by case basis that we have to look at it, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
assume, and I just want for transparency, I assume when you say partner schools, you're talking about the
That would be the purpose built.
purpose built, right? That's what we're talking about, correct? Are we just
Well,
gonna name
I
them?
want that person to clarify because I know them as purpose built. You got Candezi's and stuff like that. So
Right.
because they're partner and charter schools, it's like grouped in the same space
Yeah.
together.
And listen, I think that's an extremely nuanced conversation. Like, if the charter school thing is one thing, but the partner schools is a very different thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think with our partner schools, you really have to do what we said we were going to do. You got to review whether or not these these entities are being effective or not. And if they're not
Mm-hmm.
being effective, then it's time for a change,
There
right?
you go.
So that is where I stand on that. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm about what are the results for our babies, and if the math
Right.
is mathing, then we got to do something else.
That's it. That's it. I like that. Absolutely. Miss Sherelle, I'm gonna turn it over to you, my love.
Well, I appreciate it, and the question was clarified as a purpose built. So, Mr. Brooks actually addressed that issue. So, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks. This is Miss Sherelle. How are you today?
Hi, Miss Sherelle. How you doing, Queen?
I have not had the opportunity nor the pleasure of meeting you, but I'm certainly glad that you're in this space.
Thank you. It's an honor to meet you.
So and I truly appreciate you and your family having a history of wanting and being willing to be educators to all children, and so that's important and foremost on my mind. I can tell you that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to jump right in. Ms. Howard really just took up all your time. You know that, don't you? But anyway, we're hoping that you can stay with us a little bit longer. So, Mr. Brooks, on your website, it states that in addition to equitable distribution of resources, funding, technology, and perhaps instructional material, that you are committed to eliminating disparities relating to having access to resources necessary to be successful in the educational setting.
Yeah.
So my question is, what disparities do you see as being the contributing factor? And should you be elected as the next District 7 at-large member, how will you galvanize your colleagues to respond to the inequitable distributions as well as the educational disparities of the identified marginalized population?
All right. Thank you for the question, Ms. Sherelle. That's a deep one. So truth be told, the COVID pandemic really kind of highlighted for us things that many of us in our community have been advocating for and yelling at folks about for a long time. We have a digital divide in our city where maybe 1 in 4 Black families even has access to the internet at broadband speeds within their home. When I ran for council in 21, that was one of the biggest things that I pushed for, was that the city of Atlanta needs to have a municipally owned 5G internet service that it provides for free to APS students and senior citizens. But I still stand on that. We should be having free internet access available to every single APS family in this city. It's something that we can do. Other cities and other places are doing that work, and I think it's time for Atlanta to catch up. The other thing is that, we have a technology divide as well. And we all know, like, some of our kids were supplied with the Chromebooks and whatnot, and kids were kids with those Chromebooks, and they are raggedy. So there needs to be an investment in technology and easing access to technology for our kids. If they cannot access the internet, then they cannot participate in where our world is today. But also, I think we also need to kind of get back to the basics with some of the resources too. Our kids spend so much time in front of a screen at school that it is maddening for me. It is actually one of the negative consequences of like the pandemic. Schools felt like, if you have physical books, it would transmit the virus. And so we like kind of locked them away and we stopped investing in books. Well, our kids spent a year and a half at home and they didn't have books at home. I asked my kids, I actually had a deep dive, hour-long conversation with my babies. I teach sophomores right now, but I also teach seniors. I'll teach seniors in the spring. And I asked my kids, about literacy and what some of the barriers were. I mean, they said two things. Number one, kind of shocked me. They said the phone. It's too much of a distraction to them. But also they said they don't physically have books available to them. So like during the pandemic, many of our kids who, I'm here in Riverdale, the average income is $21,500, right? Like it's not different than some of our most challenged schools in Atlanta. So my kids said the only book they had in their house is Bible. They literally have no text to them. Harvard studies prove, and they show part of the science of reading. Our kids learn better and comprehend better when they physically have text in front of them. This is true for everyone, children and adults. But because of the pandemic and us kind of moving away from physical text, our kids are not engaging with text physically anymore. And I think that's an investment that we really need to deep dive back into. Like we got to get our kids touching books. My son, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about him later, but my son should be a senior at Maynard Jackson right now. And he never came home with a textbook. His entire, I mean, he was the pandemic freshman, right? And ever since, he had not come home with a textbook since he was in middle school. And this is the reality for a lot of our kids. They're not touching books. And these are resources I believe that we need to be reinvesting into so that our kids can become proficient readers, because 25% reading proficiency for Black kids is unacceptable. 35% reading proficiency for all of our kids is abysmal. And I'm not going to stand for that.
Well, that is certainly
Ms. Pepper made a comment there. She said APS offered free internet to all kids during the pandemic. They gave out hotspots. This is true, but also I want to note this, and this is what happened. So they gave out free hotspots, and they were supposed to be 5G. The issue was the providers ended up dialing down the speed of that internet to about 3G. And so if you were one of those families that had to survive on that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I think to kind of just say like, oh, yeah, well, we did that and that was good enough. No, it's not. It's not good enough. Our kids deserve better than this. We should be having high speed internet access for free for life. That needs to be how we do business, not just because we were in a pandemic.
And I want to touch on that because I think that is not necessarily even the school issue. That is a city issue for sure.
Yes.
Which I'm glad you ran during that time and lifted that up, because I think the city partnering with Georgia Power, Comcast, Infinity most definitely could have got together. And the real issue is they don't have that high speed connection in certain parts of town. They just don't have it yet. Well, hopefully they got it now, which we know not every area. But
right, everyone doesn't have fiber optics yet. Yeah,
that's right. Right. So maybe we need to take that concern to the city. Most definitely, Ms. Sherelle.
I'm with you. And I think, you know, what would be helpful is for us to have a school board member who has relationships with city council that can get legislation passed on other bodies of government. And that is one of the things that I bring to the table is clearly I can get legislation passed at the state house, but also when you see officers riding around with steady blue lights on, you could thank me for that too. So I'm able to get legislation done at the city council level as well. So that gives us the opportunity to touch and reach and affect places that we can't on the board.
Okay. I am loving this. So I'm gonna keep this moving. And you're right about that hotspot. That bandwidth was nothing. So I experienced that down to 2.5. As a matter of fact, you said 3 point.
I was just trying to not make it look bad, but
I'm not trying to make anybody look bad, but the truth is gonna be the truth, and it's gonna shame the devil every time. But anyway. So I'm going to go here, and I'm glad you were speaking about the pandemic, because this is where I want to go next. Yeah. It is believed that it is the world desire to not again experience a global pandemic such as COVID-19. The pandemic highlighted the ugly truths of the educational system, the unique needs of students, and the often overlooked challenges of teachers, the unheard voices of students and their families. And it definitely told the story of the many unsung heroes, teachers. It captured the disparities relating to education, health, communities, and economic wealth. As an active teacher of the state or Clayton County District, what were the challenges you bear witness to, and what concrete plans would you bring to the table that would assist the board and the district in their efforts to address the lingering effects of the lingering challenges judiciously?
Okay, that was a deep one again. I will say how Clayton County was affected specifically, and I'm going to speak specifically about Riverdale, right? Because, you know, if I said Fulton County, that doesn't tell everyone's story, right? But how we experienced in Riverdale was school shut down in March. And immediately a week after, one of my students had lost their dad to the virus. And the same thing was true of many of my kids. Southern Regional Hospital, which is right down the street from my school, had zero capacity available to them. And the reason is that the majority of my students' parents were working people facing jobs. They were working Uber, they were working Lyft, they were working Walmart, they were working, McDonald's, they were working Cookout. And so they were more likely and susceptible to getting sick. The other thing too is that because kids were not in the school building, many of them who already were dealing with being dealing with financial disparities, right? Not having much resources available, they ended up going to work. And we talk about well, where did all the kids go? A lot of them went to work. I can't tell you how many kids, when I was teaching them virtual, had their phone like propped up on the cash register while they were working at Walmart, or propped up on the clothing rack while they were working at the Goodwill. And I'm teaching babies between interactions with customers, right? And the same thing is true of right now. A lot of our kids, like, they ended up just kind of feeling like working hourly jobs made more sense to them than actually going to school. And so now schools are having to compete with getting our kids to come to school and stay in school, as opposed to going out into the workforce too soon and too early, where they're not really being paid their value. And so now for me, that kind of tends to be one of the lingering things, that we have an impact on our attendance rates all over that was affected by this. The other part, again, was the digital divide that we talked about. We really saw how many of our kids didn't have access. And then now we're seeing the effects of the learning loss, which we knew was going to happen. Everybody knew it was going to happen. I mean, throughout the country. It's not unique to Clayton. It's not unique to Atlanta. It just is what it is. But now we have to be intentional about not just improving the literacy and math proficiency of our children, but we also have to comprehensively wrap our arms around the entire family. And I think there needs to be an intentionality around adult literacy, because how can we expect our babies to read better if no one can help them at home? So we have to make sure that we are resourcing our families so that they are getting what they need, so that we can improve the living standards of the adults and the children in the home. I really personally believe that we have to stop looking at education as just being child focused, and it needs to be family focused.
So would this be your plan that you would be bringing to the board as a joining member?
Absolutely. For me, it would be making sure that we have adult literacy programs available. It would be making sure that we have remediation as well as access to additional tutoring available. That is extremely important. When I talk with families up in Candler Park, families up in Inman Park, families that send their kids to Midtown, you know what I learned? Almost all of them send their babies to private tutoring. Almost all of them send their babies to private tutoring, right? And so we'll look at the results in the schools and we'll say, oh man, the schools must be doing amazing things. But what we are ignoring is the privileges a community has to give their babies more access to additional enrichment to help improve their academic outcomes, right? We're also ignoring the fact that if you come from a family where you have at least one college educated parent, you are that much more likely to be successful academically. We're also ignoring the fact that many of our families have not been taken care of or treated well by our school systems. And just like we deal with church hurt, we got a lot of folks dealing with school hurt. And so we have some healing within our community culturally that we have to do to make sure that school feels like a place that's home, is welcoming, is for us as well.
Okay, I love that response. I think we're on it, Ms. Howard. And thank you to the people who have joined this conversation. We certainly appreciate your listening ear and all the things that Mr. Brooks is bringing to the table. So I'm going to move because you brought up an interesting point to me. So as a current high school economics teacher, what behaviors of the current board, the current APS board, and its policies that are adverse or non-productive to effectively addressing the disproportionate discipline and suspension rate of boys, of students in school in economically challenged areas, and more specifically, those students who have documented disabilities?
Yeah. Ooh, okay. One of the numbers that I wanted to find that I have yet to find was a correlation between Lexile scores and disciplinary actions, right? What I know is this: a lot of our kids get in trouble because they start engaging in escapism, right? So if I'm not able to perform well in the class and I'm sitting in the class and now I feel less than, I feel like I don't really belong here, I don't know what's going on, I'm gonna act out, I'm gonna skip, I'm gonna figure out a way to get out of this uncomfortable situation. And for many of our kids, that's going to lead to negative consequences and disproportionately for us, right? Also, we have racial bias and we have a myriad of other things that go on, which ends up being why we have a 78% Black population with a 91% disciplinary actions being imposed on our babies. And so this, for me, is something I take extremely personal. As I told you, I teach only interrelated classes. So many of my kids have learning deficits and challenges. And with those learning deficits and challenges come some of those behavioral challenges that, you know, make things hard. Honestly, it can make things hard. It makes it hard for the child. It makes it hard for the teacher. It makes it hard for the school and for the community. But until we start really addressing the social emotional needs of our kids, we're not really going to be able to tackle those issues. Now, what I will say is, when you have someone on the board, especially if a child is brought up to a tribunal or something to that effect, when they have someone on that dais who looks like them, who comes from what they come from, who understands the underlying issues without that baby even having to name them, that helps. The last thing policy-wise I would say is that our children deserve to have proper representation when they're going to these tribunals and whatnot. And too often, these babies are left to fend for themselves, and that's not fair. We have to do better about that and making sure that that child has proper representation, that family has a proper resource to enlighten them on their rights and to help them understand the process and to help them advocate for what their child needs. Because many times, the behavioral issues that we're having for our kids is not just the outcome of that child's choices. It has a lot to do with the gaps and deficits that we felt that child. And we need to hold ourselves accountable about doing better before we keep trying to hold these kids accountable and act like it's just their fault.
Now, I to touch on that because I remember going to a school where they had like 600 suspension one school year, and this was between about, I think the principal said 20 or 30 students. I was like, that cannot be right. But we was coming back in off of being out for the pandemic. But here's the thing. The people that these babies see that go through the suspension, the tribunal, the kick out, they look just like them.
Yeah.
And that's hard. Because like you just said, I mean, they need their representation, but you will also think that people understand that, you know, okay, this baby's going through this baby's going through that, you know, and maybe we need to your point, get to the root cause, which, want to be fair, you know, education is for education, you know, but we do have partners that can address, you know, any barriers that they have. But what do you think about it?
Ms. Waukesha, we are more than education, right? We are more than just academics. And I think like if the pandemic didn't show us anything, it showed us that, right? Because like our children's food insecurity, the bridge over that is the school. Our kids' housing insecurity, the bridge for that is the school. Our kids' mental health needs and service needs, the bridge for that is the schools. Like I agree with you, right? Trust me, like it's coming from a teacher, right? We're asked to do more than what we are compensated for, trained for.
That's right.
Right? Or any of those things. But if when we see babies in need, you know, we step up.
We always do.
Regardless if we're resourced.
I'm a teacher right now. I'm a teacher right now myself. So I know that is, I mean, this a real serious issue. But what I've learned in advocating is that we have got to a point where we have placed, and you just said it, so much on the teacher, where she's the nurse, she's the, you know, psychiatrist, she's the counselor, she's the freaking referee because she got to break up fights. But at the end of the day, here in Atlanta, our babies get to see us. And so we can connect them to the resources we can, but the main focus is teaching and learning for sure. I think we really have done a disservice, and this is throughout the country.
But also, Ms. Waukesha, if we don't take care of the Maslow's, if we don't take care of the basic needs of our babies, you're not teaching them anything. And I think that is one of the missteps. But
let me ask you this: is that the teacher role? Because the teacher only can do so much now. Now, what she can do is make some referrals. But I think what has terribly happened is we have placed so much on teachers where they're burnt out. And now we're getting people who didn't even go to school to be a teacher. Now, I agree most definitely that those needs have to be addressed, but at the end of the day, the partners are there. We got to let these teachers get back to what they do best, which is teaching. So I'm going to land and give it back to Ms.
Yes.
Sheree.
But Mr. Brooks, I agree with you. You're speaking of the hierarchy of needs, which permits children to be able to settle down in the classroom and be able to absorb any form of information. So I appreciate that. And so I'm going to go here, and I don't know how much time we have, Miss Howard, you have to tell me. But here we go. Your experiences as a classroom teacher have prepared you to understand challenges, and which allows you to effectively advocate for meaningful change. Should you become the District 7 at-large seat member, what would you do to aid the board in understanding the importance of binding contracts such as an IEP, an individualized educational plan for students who are protected by federal law? And how can you ensure that students are receiving a valid IEP and related services?
Yeah. Well, with my experience in being a special education teacher and having to draft hundreds of IEPs over my years of service, I'm able to speak to the legalities, the practicalities, the efficiencies, the deficiencies of any particular IEP, but also in speaking to like what are the gaps on the ground. Because I think what gets missed a lot of times is excellent policy or an excellent plan, but the reality of can it be executed? Are the resources there? Are the accommodations there? Are the educators who are providing the services educated, supported, or given the professional development that they need to efficiently, effectively do the work? These type of things come up. And so I think my perspective will allow us to be able to bridge some of these gaps, because a lot of times we got good plans, we don't have great deliverability of these plans. So that'll be one of the areas that I think I really could give us a richness of perspective that we've not had before.
Well, I look forward to that, so that students with disabilities their disabilities can be addressed effectively. Yes. And not just on paper. And sometimes what we've often find as parents with students with disabilities that the IEPs are not written appropriately or carried out.
A lot of times our teachers are not well trained enough in how to do so, to be honest with you.
Right.
And I see it all the time. My co-teacher gonna get mad at me, but she hiding behind me, Miss Strap. And we, this is when you work in this model where you have to navigate the different needs of children throughout a class, you get to kind of see the difference between what sounds good and what is good. And unless you've been here, you wouldn't know.
So I guess that your perspective of being a teacher will certainly help the board in understanding that IEPs are binding contracts that are governed by federal law. and that those students are protected by federal law.
Correct.
So I'm glad that that's something that you will definitely bring to the table, and hopefully we can get out of some of the ruts and lawsuits as it relates to children with disability. I have a number of things I could talk to you all day long, because you're on the money when you talk about truancy, and how we address truancy. And listening to you, I do understand and realize that some of our students that were in high school took jobs during the pandemic just to help families get by.
Yep.
So then we start speaking of absenteeism and truancy. Yeah. And so we can see where that lands. But I'll go here. Black students are 2 times likely to be subject to school-related arrests compared to their white counterparts, as studied by American Bar Association. How do you propose to present a plan to the board, and what do you do to address that issue? I know that we introduced resource officers, which I think as being in law enforcement myself for the last I should say for the past 27 years, resource officers take on a completely different role once you start introducing juveniles
Yeah.
to the picture. So I'm just wondering, how would you present that to the board and curtail that school to prison pipeline?
Yeah.
I mean, and we've been working on this forever, but
Yeah.
somebody has got to start doing it, because now you've seen after the pandemic, and I'm saying this more now than ever, because the pandemic brought out some of the uglies. Okay, and we discovered that while we were in classrooms, we didn't necessarily care particularly for our neighbor. And we probably didn't necessarily know how to care for our neighbor as well as ourselves. So I just want to know from you, you know, as a teacher, but also bringing that skill set to the board, how would you help them to see that this is a true issue? It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to affect more and more families and communities, and certainly the school itself.
Yes. You know, I got to be honest with you. This is a conversation that sounds different when you go from one area of our town to another. If we are on the north side of town, you will hear parents and families advocating strongly for more officers to be in their schools. If you go to the south side of town, you might hear a very different conversation on that side of town, because the realities are, and listen, I'm 39, I'll be 40 next year. I grew up, I was in school during the Columbine era. And when that happened, the school resource officers were deemed as like a response for how we can have our schools be safer in the event of a catastrophe of that sort. But what has happened over time is that instead of Black children being seen as acting out as children do and just kind of getting a slap on the wrist, suspension or in school or Saturday suspension or after school or Saturday detention or after school detention or what have you. Now, if our kids get into a fight, they're getting adjudicated. And it is almost automatic. And so the rates in which it happens within our community is really fast tracking our children to end up in the prison industrial system. And it is one of the biggest issues, in my opinion, that we have to address. So long as our schools continue to fail kids, we will always keep jails in business. And I want to make sure that we start putting jails out of business. I want to see Fulton County not be overcrowded. I want to see the ACDC not be necessary to have anymore for the city. And I think the best way for us to be able to do that is to make sure that our schools are stronger. It is also to make sure that we are paying attention to our at-risk youth, and we're able to identify why are our kids not coming to school. Why are our kids choosing to skip? Why are students not comprehending the information being given to them? And then they need the resources. They need the mentorship. They need something more than just what we give them in the classroom to make sure that they are supported. And I believe if we do all of these things, we will be able to get to a day where we bring down that 91%, and it does not look so as disproportionate as it does currently. But I guarantee you this, there is a small number of children who have a lot to contribute to the amount of disciplinary actions that happen. And those babies need to be hyper-focused on. As a teacher, I'm gonna tell you this, when I see that one kid who is the biggest challenge to get to like be focused, that's the one that I'm coming for first. That's the one I'm trying to foster a relationship with. I'm trying to build rapport with. I'm trying to learn their story and know who they are. A lot of times we're not taking the time to learn who some of these babies are because we're too afraid to talk to them in the first place. And so when you have someone who looks like these babies, that allows for our community really to have some representation, to have someone's ear, to be able to know that they have someone advocating on their behalf. This is who I am. As I told you, I was the education chair for the Georgia NAACP and still am to this day. And these are the issues and the things that we are focused on because we know that they create the barriers for our kids that could lead them down a track that they can never come back from. I have a brother who, did 10 years in prison, and I've seen the effects of prisons on families. And what that does to limit your opportunities. And I do not want to see that for any more of our babies at all.
Well, I'm glad you made it personal, because in my years in law enforcement, what I found to be disheartening is in working at the Fulton County Jail and having individuals who come in there to be processed and could not read. And so that part disturbed me more than anything. And I understood why um, they were there, because if you don't embrace me, I'll embrace myself and the things that I can wreak havoc on. And I use the word wreak havoc loosely, only from the standpoint is that when you don't have things in control, things become out of control.
Yeah.
And so it's not all necessarily the individual's child's fault in their behavior. A lot of times, you know, teachers and administrators and people who sit on boards, just like what you're saying, if you have no idea about what goes on daily, they can't relate. And so you have children who said, okay, well, they don't understand me. So you know what? I'll just connect. I'll
Yeah.
become my own world.
I,
So
I
I
there's a
appreciate that.
there's an old African adage that says, if a child doesn't feel the warmth from the love of the village, they will burn it down so they can feel the warmth anyway.
Yes,
So it's the idea that like we have to take care of our children. We have to take care of our community, or else they, you know, our kids aren't engaged in schools. They're going to be engaged in the streets, and we have to win their attention. We have to win their trust. We have to win their belief, and we have to win their presence.
right. I agree with you on those points. Definitely from seeing it from two perspectives. I can stand by you and bear witness that if you don't control it, it'll control. So I tell people all the time, if to not make a decision is a decision in itself.
What you
Um,
don't change, you choose.
right, exactly. So I appreciate you coming on and tackling some sensitive issues for me, and hopefully some of those that are of the community. But and I'm not sure what Ms. Howell has for you, but you answered the questions that were presented to me, and I am going to certainly make certain that they get back to the individuals that ask um, that you address those issues. And for me, I'm completely satisfied with the responses. But that's just me. You okay? That's just one ear. That's just Mr. Rail, so don't count that against him. Um, but what I do want to know, if you're on the board and you have a disagreement with one of your fellow colleagues,
Mhm.
and it's going to be either you choosing the side of the colleague or the side of the right of children, which side would you stand?
It's always going to be about our babies first. And I think if you look at anyone who's an educator and a career educator, that's going to be their credo. It's always going to be about the babies first. It is part of the reason why we're doing this interview right now in my classroom, right? Is that it's always about the babies first. We show up for them, and that is why we are doing the work. And I'm privileged enough that I could be doing a whole lot of other things than showing up in the classroom and doing a lot better for myself financially, in terms of what I receive for income. But I do this work because I understand that it is God's intention for my life to be present for our babies and to serve our children, which is why I teach where I teach. It is on purpose. I could be anywhere else. I could be at Woodward. I could be at Padea. I could be at Ron Clark. I could be in Atlanta somewhere, right? But I'm serving a community that really has a need, and that is what this is about. If we have a skill set, if we have certain privileges, we have a responsibility, and that's why I'm putting my name in the ring right now to be able to serve the city of Atlanta in a way that Atlanta has not been served before. We've never had an active teacher on our school board, and so I think that is extremely important.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Howell, but I am going to charge you with one thing.
Yes.
Okay, and should you become this District 7 at large member, I am going to charge you with finding a mentor that will mentor Black boys with disabilities. and particularly those on the spectrum.
Yes.
Find a partner, because we find many partners, but we find partners in funds as opposed to in purpose.
So I'm glad you brought that up. One of my good friends, actress Holly Robinson Peete, she's in town right now. We have dinner plans. She has a foundation because one of her babies is on the spectrum. And my son's foundation, the Bryce Brooks Foundation, and her foundation for her baby are going to be doing some collaborative work. And I think that breadth of person who not only has the financial philanthropic ability,
right,
also is of our community and is able to give us the mentorship that we need within that community, especially, could be very critical. And so again, yes, I'm a teacher. Yes, I know a lot of people, right? I know a lot of people. But those things come with relationships. They are authentic, they are deep, and they come to a benefit for our community. My relationships are all rooted on, do you serve our community? And if you are that person, then we got something to jail on. And so those are the only people that I share in community with. And I'll be more than happy to bring all of the resources and relationships I have at every level to affect positive outcomes for kids throughout Atlanta.
Okay. Ms. Howard, I think that's a good segue.
Yeah.
Okay.
We gonna most definitely hold
Mr.
him
Brooks,
to that.
I'm telling you, we gonna look. You
I'll hold
own
me to it. And listen, you can have my phone number. I will publicize. It's 404-889.
Wait a minute, we're not that fast. Just because you
That's for the playback. I got you.
Just because you're 39 and going don't mean we like 39 and going.
Let me tell you something. Look, every time folks start trying to call me the young man and all that, I appreciate it because around here to these kids, I'm unk status and I'm old all day long. So you
right.
me, okay?
Okay.
So as we get ready to wrap up, because I know you have to run, two things. One question is, currently in Atlanta, because you're running for a school board seat, how have you been able to hold our current school board members accountable? We talked about stuff like that affect the Jackson cluster, which is, where you are, rezoning, behavior issues. How have you been able to hold our board rep for 1 and 7 accountable, other than you running, because that's a good one right now? How have you been able to hold them accountable to see some type of change with all these issues we just covered?
Yeah, I mean, if you were to Google my name, you'll see a few articles where I've shown up in many of our community forums. When we're having rezoning conversations, whether it affects my neighborhood or not, I show up. When we talked about Benteen Elementary potentially shutting down, who was there advocating? I was one of the few people in the neighborhood who had the privilege and the access to be able to get some market change on that. And I advocated, and I did not have a child attending school there. So for me, it's not about doing things that are self-interested, because that's not how I operate. I'll even further explain that. Wesley International was located in a building right there on Custer. At the time, it was managed by a for-profit entity, and us families at Wesley came together to remove the for-profit entity. It was Imagine Schools that was managing at the time. And we put a nonprofit board over Wesley. Now, we also pulled the school from that $1 million lease that it had per year. And this is $1 million of like APS money that was being paid to this for-profit entity for the facility. We removed it from that building, which, mind you, was walking distance from my house, okay? And moved them to the Ed Cook building on Memorial Drive, which is 2.5 miles away from my house. And I supported it. Why? Because it was the best thing for all of our families. It actually was not to the benefit of my family. But again, that's who I am. I don't do things based upon just what's best for my kid. I do things based upon what's best for our community. And so to answer your question, I show up at those board meetings. When I was having issues with Benteen being shut down and the zoning that we had in that area, then at the time, Brenda Muhammad was our District 1 school board rep. And she did not support fixing the zoning in the area. We ran her. Now, Brenda Muhammad and I have a very good relationship. I have signs of her yard right now, And she gives me a lot of good advice in terms of, what's going on in the school board and the historical perspectives. And the same thing is true when zoning came up earlier this year. A month before my son passed away, we had meetings at Maynard Jackson, and you can see me up there again vouching for my neighbors over in the Chosewood area that they not be zoned out of Benton, right? And again, that is not to my personal benefit. Now, that was my first opportunity getting to meet Ms. Tamara Jones in person, who is in seat 7. I'd not had many interactions with her beyond that, and then maybe in a couple forums, getting to see her here and there. With Miss Katie Howard is a little different. Our kids went to the same school. We live in the same neighborhood, and we'll cross paths with each other. And I have direct conversations with them. I always have. Anytime when schools were shut down and there was conversations about reopening, conversations about vaccinations, conversations about masking, all of these type of things, I'd constantly be holding forums. If any of you are not, I invite you to follow me on Instagram at call me Shivy, SHIVY. You'll see there I have about 86,000 followers, but it is all focused on education. And so throughout these times, I'm constantly holding forums where tens of thousands of people are watching and engaging and being a part of this conversation. So when we talk about being able to have access, when we talk about transparency, when we talk about being able to have robust conversations, when we talk about who is it that's in your ear giving you information and whatnot, you are talking to a person who has one of the widest networks you could possibly have, and being able to get feedback from so many different directions so that we're making decisions with all of the information so that we get the best outcomes.
Well, thank you. I totally appreciate that. And if you're watching the replay, go check him out. He is running for seat 7. He told you how to get in touch with him. Thank you for this conversation. It was well needed, and it was a lot of questions that was answered today. So I appreciate you for being here. I know you got to get back to your class because that's what teachers do. And we look forward to seeing you in the future. And I know you will have much success in this race. And I know you'll continue to work even afterward. So unless anybody else has any questions.
Yes, Ms. Howard, ask Mr. Brooks to drop his information in the chat so that could be shared. That could be shared.
Absolutely. And one more, I see one more person left. Sherry, do you have a question? Or are you
no, I'm letting him get back to the students.
Okay, good job. Yes. Well, thank you so much for doing this. We around. I'm gonna have this space open in the future for more people to be able to come on and be engaged and just keep lifting up the community voice. I think you're doing some good work, and I hope to talk to you soon.
No, thank you so much for the time and the opportunity. Thank you for your fairness in it all. I really do appreciate you for that. I've been able to watch some of the work of many of you. Ms. Sherry and I have been able to share space in the past. And I just appreciate y'all for showing up. Because
listen, you don't know it, but I was in that same space with y'all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, yeah, I was there too.
But listen, I'm just glad that we get the dialogue. When you hit the stop record button, we talk some more. But I just I'm for me, I think it is important that folks know what is honest and what is true. I got an opportunity to listen to my opponent talk with you all, and just kind of the painting of me is just so incorrect. Like, oh, my opponents, got all this big corporate PAC money. That is a lie. No, I don't. There is a PAC that is supporting my campaign. Equity in education, it is what it is, but that is not some big corporate PAC. I'm not getting funding from Home Depot, Coca-Cola, AT&T or somebody, right? At the same time, I'm also a labor guy. I'm a member of the AFT, right? Like, I was the Working Family Caucus legislative aide. All right, I will be supported by labor. So how could I be some corporate bad guy and then also be a labor guy at the same time? That doesn't gel. I really don't appreciate disingenuous framing of individuals, especially as a Black man, looking to serve our Black babies and all babies within our school, while there is no representation that looks like them on the board, right? I don't appreciate that. So I do appreciate the opportunity to set the record straight. I do appreciate opportunity to dialogue with you directly. I know
Mhm.
the legislation that Senator Estevez put up to change the charter to allow for an active teacher to serve is something that you posted about, and something
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also at the same time, you have to mind that the entire City of Atlanta delegation voted for it. Everyone, okay, unanimously. And not only that, the board member who I'm running against had to vote for it too.
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So like, let's just be clear about it. There's nothing felonious going on. There's nothing shady going on. At the end of the day, teachers deserve to serve on the school board. Plain and simple, right? Whether I am successful or I'm not successful, guess what? Teachers will get to continue to run for school board. And for me, that's important. For me, that's legacy work. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And so I'm just here to serve. Thank you.
I appreciate that because that's the hard work right there. That's the hard work.
Look,
This has been
that's a
it's been good.
passionate speech, but look, I'm gonna hold your feet to the fire now.
Look, I'm serious because we got to be honest. We talk about how important it is to compensate our teachers better, right? We talked about our kids needing more tutoring. We talked about our kids needing mental health services. Well, when my opponent voted no against the budget, it was voting no on all of those things. And then her response will be, well, I didn't believe that the student success formula put enough money into the schools. And the truth of the matter is it didn't put enough money in Midtown where her babies went. And that was her issue with it. So let's tell the truth.
Okay. Now, and with that being said,
okay, you can stop the recording.
Oh, we're gonna stop it now. Okay.
No, I don't have to stop.
We didn't record. You didn't record.
No,
Right?
I'm just
we are
joshing.
going to stop the recording.
No.
Stop the recording.
Stop the recording. I'm fair. But I appreciate you for being here, and I appreciate your school for accommodating you, to make time to be a part of this process. I do think teachers should be a part. I'm happy that you lobbied for that. I'm happy that she voted for that, because even once you guys move on to something else or no longer serving and running in these spaces, there will be an opportunity for teachers to have their voice on board. So I appreciate that, hands down.
Okay. Well, Mr. Brooks, hang around.